I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 236 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today, my friends, we are going to talk about envy. So buckle up, because I know that this is a topic that maybe makes you cringe a little bit when you think about confronting it. It's not very fun to think about the times in our lives when we have experienced envy, that's for sure. Like, it's not always, probably never, a really positively framed emotion. And honestly, I think it's something that we can feel a little bit of shame about, a little bit of embarrassment, and wish that this were not an emotion that chased us around. And yet it does, right? It does chase us around. And I want to open by drawing a distinction between two words, which are envy and jealousy. So we titled this episode Jealous Much because, honestly, envy much doesn't sound as good. But I want to draw this distinction. Brené Brown recently clarified this in her book, Atlas of the Heart. And so if you've read that book, you'll be with me on this clarification. And it is the subtle difference between envy and jealousy. And it goes like this. Jealousy really involves a third party. So when we are jealous, it's that I want what that person has and I don't want them to have it, right? It's sort of like I want to take away something from someone else in order to have it myself. Envy is a little bit more agnostic of that. It is, I want it, right? I want what she's having. It's fine with me if she keeps it, right? It's just that I want it for myself. So jealousy typically implies that third party is involved. And so for today, either could work, but I'm really going to focus specifically on envy, which is when we look at someone else's life and wish that we had it, wish that we were them, that we had the elements of life that we see this other person seemingly enjoying. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to share in today's episode, I really was thinking about, why do I think we find ourselves in this situation so often, right? What is the behavior pattern? What is it that we do that flips us into envy so regularly? And, it's probably something that you can relate to your personal experience with this. And you've probably seen people that you love go through this, whether it's your spouse or your partner, whether it's one of your children, maybe a sibling, a colleague, a friend. This is a collection of emotions that I think we recognize because maybe it's so prevalent. And I was thinking about, what are the practices, or what's like, if we double clicked on this emotion, what's going on underneath it that causes it to rise up? And then what could we do instead? So I'm going to share those with you today, and I want you to see if they are relatable to you. The first one is really taken out of the field of social psychology. And the practice that we engage in is only looking at who is ahead of us. Right? We look only at the person who we think has it better. And we choose that person, often the very best person, as our basis of comparison. Right? So think back to grade school, where the people you probably came home talking about were, the queen bees or the ringleaders. They were the people that it was like, well, I don't have the same kind of shoes as this person, or, my backpack or book bag aren't as cool as this person's, or I don't have the right lunchbox, or wouldn't it be awesome if I had that toy that they have, or if I were the captain of that team. We look to and idolize, essentially, the people who seem to be at the top of the pecking order. It's aspirational to do that. And then we never really lose that trait. Right? So technically this is called upward social comparison, this practice. And what happens when we engage in upward social comparison is it can be beneficial. It can sort of motivate us to be our best selves, right? It can gently prod us to take different actions that make our lives better. So it has a useful sort of characteristic to it. However, when we spend all of our time focusing on the people who are ahead of us, particularly those who are far ahead of us, we can just feel bad often. We can spend a lot of our days just feeling really bad about ourselves. And what happens is we discount or we ignore all of the people we would see if we turned around and looked behind us. So we're always looking at who's ahead of us in whatever it is that we're pursuing, but we're not thinking about who are we ahead of, okay? So what would happen if instead we just took our place in the middle? If we acknowledge that we are in the middle of some kind of imaginary line. Yes, there are people ahead of us who are winning, right? In air quotes. They seemingly have it better, but there are also people who are striving to be where we are. And we can leverage that downward social comparison to shift our perspective. Right? We can get some freedom from the weight of envy if we just acknowledge that it is in fact a two-sided dynamic. Yes, some people are ahead of us, and it is fair to acknowledge them, to celebrate them, maybe even to figure out what we would have to do to move our way up in the line. But it is also appropriate to think about who is not yet where we are and may never be, right? Because it can give us the perspective of gratitude. So as soon as we realize that, yes, we don't have it as good as some people, but there are people who don't have it as good as us, we can get emotional freedom from the weight of having to constantly be pursuing more and better, right? Because more and better can become exhausting. It has its place, but it can become exhausting or even crushing. So taking your place in the middle is a strategy that you can use to offset that pattern of always only looking at who is ahead of you and feeling bad about yourself in the process. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. The second perspective or the second practice that seems to get in our way is, I'll just call it zooming in, right? It's like we have a camera and we got a big zoom lens and we are just zooming in on one attribute, right? One aspect, one slice of someone else's life. And we are so focused on that one thing, that they have that we want. And maybe even focusing on how it looks, because do we even know how it feels, right? But looking at this one attribute, one aspect of their life, and it can really fuel the envy machine. It's a myopic perspective. And again, I think of it like if you make one of those telescopes out of your hand where you put it right at your eye, and you can only see what's inside the circle of your thumb and forefingers. It's ignoring everything else that's going on in that picture. We're just looking at that one aspect. Social media clearly fuels this, right? Someone can curate that perfect shot in their social media feed. Everything in that shot can look perfect, and you have no idea what kind of chaos is going on just off camera. And we do this with our lives. We look at that moment in time, that one conversation that we had with somebody, who we ran into at the grocery store, or that one moment that we saw them at church, or that one photograph that they posted on Instagram. And we fill in the rest of it, but we're making up a story, right? Because we're really only having visibility to a very small aspect of their lives. I think this is particularly true when it comes to comparing ourselves to people we don't know well. So first of all, put anything in the celebrity culture into that, because we don't know those people. We just feel like we do, right? Because we're presented with their images so often. It can be true of colleagues at work who we see in a very limited context, or it could be neighbors, that we just see from time to time, and we're perhaps only focusing on the best attributes. So the antidote to this one is to zoom out, to sort of use a wide angle lens and then refocus. So zooming out, two-step process, zooming out forces us really to acknowledge the whole picture. When we zoom out on that comparison, we look at not just that one attribute that's poking at our envy, right? But we look at the rest of this person's life, the rest of their being, the rest of them, and say to ourselves, I guess in shorthand, would I trade all of it? Would I trade all of my life for all of that person's life? And most often the answer there is no, right? There's some attribute that we would love, but maybe not everything that comes along with it. So that wide angle lens can give us new perspective where we take that attribute that we're really jonesing for and we can shrink it back to something that's manageable. And then if we refocus on our own best qualities or gifts or strengths or current blessings, we can tap that deep well of gratitude. So when we're busy looking at someone else's one single thing, right? First, we lose perspective on their whole story. Then we lose perspective on ours. So if we can get that wide angle back and see our entire collection of blessings and gifts and challenges all in one big basket and focus on the things we truly love, the things we are so deeply grateful for, the things we wouldn't change or trade for all the world, that can shift our perspective out of envy. Okay, one more for you. And this is what I call the freeze frame. So the third practice that gets in our way when it comes to envy is that we take a snapshot of a moment in time. Maybe not just one attribute. Maybe we are looking at someone else's entire, existence, as much of it as is visible to us. But we take a snapshot of a moment in time. That mom with the perfectly dressed kids and the adorable outfits and their hair is all combed and braided and they're sipping mini Starbucks drinks. And we think, why can't I get it together, right? But what happened before that moment or after that moment, we have no idea because we're not running a movie. We're just taking a freeze frame of a moment in time. We're sort of going through our day, building our own camera reel. And that is not necessarily helpful because that collection of snapshots ignores everything that could be happening before or after that thing that we're seeing in the movie. Okay. So if instead we let the movie run, we let the story play, we can remember that no one has it that good all the time, right? We don't, they don't. And honestly, no one has it that bad all the time either. If we are stuck on some attribute of our own lives that we're not so in love with at the moment. So, whether this is the mom in the Starbucks that I mentioned a minute ago, or, maybe it's the newlyweds who are on your airplane heading to vacation and you're dragging kids and luggage and everybody's sweaty. And here they are, perfectly relaxed heading off to this vacation. Maybe it's, you're reading the news and it's the founder who closed a big round of funding and they're celebrating that moment. Or maybe they're ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Maybe it's the older couple that you see walking on a beach, and again, you get that freeze frame moment of how amazing it would be to be them, to have that moment. Please remember, they are in the midst of a story, right? And so are we. Let's remember that and let the movie run. Embrace all of it, right? They're having their moment. We're watching that moment. We've been witness to that moment. People have been witness to yours. So embrace the boring parts, the parts of your story where the freeze frame may not look so good, but as part of a movie, it has its place. Embrace the scary parts. Sometimes those are the best parts of a movie where we don't know what's going to happen. The turning points. At some point, the turning point is the snapshot, right? And if we can catch it just right, we'll see it. Otherwise, we miss it, right? We get stuck in the before or the after. And of course, those glorious, perfect, shining moments when they come. When we let the movie run as we're imagining someone else's life or as we're reflecting on our own, we can get freedom from the envy that is inherent in any given freeze frame, right? Any given moment in time. And this matters because envy can be a really toxic force. It can absolutely block us from enjoying our own lives if we let it do that, right? So let's not let it. Let's collectively remember we can find our place in the middle, right? Acknowledging who's ahead, but also acknowledging that there are people behind. We can zoom out to see the whole picture and give ourselves permission to refocus on our own best attributes. And we can always let the story unfold so that we don't get stuck in a freeze frame, which can be a really misleading basis for comparison. That is all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.